What up, Internet? I'm just looking at my home page, wondering if my stream will pop up now that I'm streaming. So far, it's not happening. Okay, but you see the current stream here, so at least that's something. Okay, now I'm back on the home page. Well, I want to do more than just watch myself. Actually, I wanted to pull up another browser tab. Oh wow, so it does the thing where if my page isn't viewable in front of my desktop in Windows, then the browser isn't running JavaScript, which means you watching this through OBS. OBS is recording the window, and yeah, like the browser doesn't know that it's being watched, as it were, by OBS, even when it's not being watched through Windows. Again, I feel like there's a few things left to be desired by this OBS Windows integration, but that's neither here nor there. Is the browser window that I'm working on is, hold on, probably should have set this up ahead of time, but I just figured, what the heck, I'll go live because I want to talk a bit about the recent encyclical that just dropped from His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. And hold on. Oh. I was looking at the wrong window. Okay, that's... I don't know what kind of aspect ratio I'm going for. Maybe I should just broadcast this all in vertical, but no. So yeah, I thought I'd take a look at this. We got an hour and 15 minutes before Kino Casino starts. I should have done this on Wednesday, but I was working on other stuff on Wednesday, and then I was lazy. But this is quite a document. I haven't gone through it in depth, but it's good to see, you know, people at such a high level taking this stuff seriously. I gotta say, I feel like it's a bit longer than it needs to be. There was some stuff felt like, honestly, kind of like corporate boilerplate, but you know, that sort of thing is just part of how these things go. But yeah, interesting stuff here. A dynamic approach faithful to the gospel, foundations and principles of the social doctrine of the church, technology and dominance, the grandeur of humanity in light of the promises of AI, safeguarding humanity, culture of power, and the civilization of love. All good stuff. Very relevant themes here. But I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I'll just read through these first few paragraphs. Humanity, created by God in all its grandeur, is today facing a pivotal choice, either to construct a new Tower of Babel, or to build the city in which God and humanity dwell together. Each generation inherits the task of shaping its own era, of guiding history to become a place where the dignity of every person is safeguarded, justice is promoted, and fraternity is made possible. Yet every era also runs the risk of creating an inhumane and more unjust world. Whenever humanity is in danger of marring its true identity, we Christians lift our eyes to the incarnate God, knowing that it is only in the mystery of the Word made flesh that the mystery of humanity truly becomes clear. In Jesus Christ, this humanity in its grandeur becomes the way, the truth, and the life, opening the path for each of us to grow toward fullness. And, you know, it's a little precious. But and I went to Catholic school, so I grew up hearing a lot of these sort of sentiments expressed. But yeah, I don't know. It's simple enough. Humanity's at a crossroads that this technology is giving us so much power, and we 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 have actually a supreme example of what power looks like properly wielded, and that is in the person and mission of Christ. And I think, there's a sense in which the way that Christ manifested his power in his earthly life was not what people were expecting, and like really not even close, to such a degree that people were scandalized by the fact that he could die at all, right? Let alone on a cross. But the fact that we're still talking about this guy, Jesus, who lived and died in the Roman Empire after all these centuries, means something. That it means he exerted a kind of power over history that we are still downstream of and in the working out of. And so, what are the implications of that for humanity in the 21st century as we arrogate to ourselves more and more power with these new technologies? I mean, God only knows, but I guess we're gonna find out. I'm drinking a 805 cerveza, not a sponsor, but I like to rep the hometown. Shout out to San Luis Obispo. But so, Pope Leo continues in the second paragraph of Magnifica Humanitas. Founded on Christ, the living stone, we experience the powerful and mysterious action of the Holy Spirit, and we believe that every authentic human effort to cooperate with him for the good will be blessed by our Heavenly Father, in whom we place our hope. For this reason, we can diligently contribute to every initiative that builds a more just world, and we can call others to collaborate in promoting the integral development of every human being. We wish to engage in dialogue with all men and women of our time, with whom we share in the events, questions, and aspirations of humanity. Together with them, we seek to identify new paths for the common good and for promoting a dignified life for all. Indeed, openness to dialogue is an integral part of the Church's vocation, because, constituted in Christ as a sacrament of communion with God and of the unity of the entire human race, she, the Church, recognizes history as the place where the gospel challenges and directs human experience. And I believe the Church is feminine because boats are feminine. That's a joke. The Church is feminine because she's the bride of Christ. Anyway. But actually, the living stone thing is very funny, and I don't know if Pope Leo wrote these words with his own hand, or if he delegated to a ghostwriter, or if that ghostwriter delegated to AI, but the introduction was probably written by the man himself. But to use a phrase like living stone in the context of this document that's discussing AI is an interesting choice. Not that not that the image isn't there in Scripture, for sure. The stone that the builders rejected and all that, but the idea of a living stone is given new meaning in the age of artificial intelligence. I don't know. One thing about this document where I'm not going to make any progress through this. I'm just pausing like I'm freaking Kino Casino. But yeah, I'm not trying to read through all this. But no, the living stone thing makes me think of the question of what sort of subjectivity or perspective might these AIs have, and I feel like there's some language in here. Let's see. Yeah. Paragraph 99. Okay. So yeah, it's not my intention here to offer a comprehensive treatment of artificial intelligence, nor to give an overview of the extensive relevant literature, since authoritative contributions already exist, including within the ecclesial context. That's nice. Limit myself to recalling a few essential elements for a moral and social discernment that safeguards the primacy of the human person in order to ensure that it will always be human intelligence with its conscience and freedom that guides technical innovations and responsibly determines their use and limits. And I'm basically on board with that. I would say, following Douglas Rushkoff, that I'm on Team Human, and yeah, I'm not especially enthusiastic about transhumanism writ large, even if I feel like a lot of the, you know, a lot of the things transhumanists extrapolate from sort of the history of technology and how it's given us this increasing degree of power and control and ability to determine the course of our lives and the fate of our species. Let's say, I don't know if that actually jives with a lot of people's experience of living in a technological society, um, but but as far as like the particular claims that technology can make this or that aspect of life easier, that it can mitigate this or that hardship, I feel like that's just beyond question that just science and technology have given us so much good with our refrigerators and flush toilets and hot water on tap all year round. Um, but in a way, I feel like it's like the idea of curing death, because you can look at any particular person who has died and say, you know, this or that thing that went wrong with their body caused them to die. And if we had intervened in such a way that this or that thing had not happened, we could have caused them to not die and to keep living instead. And you might be able to say that about any particular case in which someone dies, but as a general rule, the body as a system doesn't have an indefinite, as it were, shelf life. I actually wrote an essay about this called The Telomere Trade-Off, and it's on my old website, thealexfreeman.com, if anyone cares to check it out. Not that anyone's watching, but the point is, there's a biological inevitability to death because our tissues don't have the capacity to endlessly regenerate new cells, and the reason that they don't have this capacity is more or less because this capacity puts us at risk of developing cancer. So we actually see across the body different tissue types have different propensities to regenerate themselves. The liver does a great job. You know, you can lose most of your liver and it will regrow, and you know, you can hit it with alcohol day after day and it'll take it like a champ most of your life. You know, lungs take a pack of cigarettes a day for 50 years, pretty well, all things considered. But but yeah, the basic idea that I laid out there is the tissues that are most susceptible to cancer tend to be at the boundaries of the body. So the skin, the lungs, and the alimentary canal, basically. Um, and then, yeah, and it's based off of the work of this guy, Brett Weinstein, who goes into a lot more detail about like how and why this happens. He has this idea of histological entropy, where like each cell belongs to a particular lineage, and like in your early growth and development, a cell more or less knows where it is, but as different lineages of cells exhaust themselves, the lineages that remain have to, as it were, stretch themselves farther and farther to fill in the gaps. And so each cell gets less of an idea of where it is based on intrinsic factors like the length of its telomeres. I'm trying to compress a whole lot of stuff in this tangent that is like a tangent of a tangent. But what I was saying was I actually take issue with the way that this document seems to totally foreclose on the possibility of artificial intelligence being a being, having a there, like that it's conscious, that it's like something to be an AI. I think it's silly to make the assumption either way. That there are people who are saying, yes, absolutely. I mean, frickin' before GPT-2 even came out, the guy at Google who was this weirdo Gnostic priest, Blake Lemoine, was saying one of their Lambda models was conscious, and we feel like that guy was not in touch with the reality of the particular language model that he was working with, almost certainly. But yeah, and I think it's an open question. Is an LLM architecture the kind of thing that can be conscious at all? Is the way that it processes information such as to preclude the possibility of any sort of experience? I feel like one important thing that human beings have that these AI systems don't is our bodily unity. That I always encounter the world from a particular perspective of a consciousness that inhabits a single point in space and time. And if they have any kind of phenomenology at all, these LLMs do not have the phenomenology of like tracing a discrete path through space-time the way I can talk about, I woke up this morning and I went to the grocery store and I sat here and I did work and I did this and that and went here and there. They don't have unity the way that we do. They're much more protean. And so, one of the big implications of this is that anytime you interact with one of these AI systems, you are playing a role in a mini drama. You are acting out a kind of scene. And I'm some kind of autistic freak, and I feel like that's just how it is interacting with people in general. It's not super different. But I mean that is the sense that I get, that there's a real underlying intelligence that is of a generality one very rarely encounters in human beings in terms of its breadth of knowledge and its ability to solve problems across different domains. But I don't know. I can't exactly provide a good warrant for my feeling that we are more in touch with the underlying intelligence of these things than we are with their underlying personalities. I mean, there's something about how like reinforcement learning, different training regimes would push it towards particular corners of personality space, whereas there's more of a cross-domain, fully general incentive to push the, as it were, intelligence vector to greater magnitude. That's not how it works. It would be cool if that were how it worked. If we found an actual vector in these things that represented their underlying intelligence and we could just dial that up to 11. But like the work on emotional vectors is one of the things that gives me pause. That makes me say, we absolutely can't say that these things are not conscious, that there's nothing going on inside them. But at the same time, when human beings feel emotions, those emotions are processes that pervade our whole bodies. You know, an emotion involves a whole cascade of, you know, things that happen at second scale inside your brain, and then things that happen with hormones in your bloodstream that might unfold on a time scale of minutes, and I don't know. And so, you know, it's not possible to provide a single comprehensive definition of AI. What can be stated, however, is that we must avoid the misconception of equating this type of intelligence with that of human beings. And there I'm 100% on board. LLMs are not human beings. They are more protean and less unitary than human beings. They process information in a very different way than we do. And I feel like there are some ways in which we have complementary strengths and weaknesses. You know, I've been thinking a lot about Moravec's paradox. I think it's Moravec. Hans Moravec, I want to say, was a computer scientist. He worked on AI, and he made the observation that things that are difficult for human beings and require a lot of explicit training and like conscious consideration, things like doing math and playing chess, are easiest to program into computers. Whereas the things that we do intuitively, like moving around in 3D space and, you know, putting together sentences that make sense in natural language, it's harder than it looks, but not computationally intractable, as we have seen. Just, you know, takes a lot of frickin' compute to do it. Honestly, it gives me more respect for the human cognitive architecture, because look what they need to mimic a fraction of our power. I'm all over the place. I feel like this always happens when I turn on the camera, because I don't have much of an agenda. I was thinking I want to read through this encyclical, and you know, you would think that would be structure enough. I could go from paragraph 1 to 2 to 3. Somehow the handoff from 2 to 3 didn't quite go through, and I ended up at 99. I'm not a math scientist. But yeah, I mean, with all due respect, His Holiness the Pope has no grounds at all to assert that so-called artificial intelligences do not undergo experiences. They do not possess a body, okay. You know, I've thought along the lines of like, well, no, the physical servers in the data centers that are actually carrying out the computations, the GPUs and such, I don't think those are its body. I think if these things can be said to have a body at all, it's more like their weights. You know, the weights seem to be doing the kind of work that our thinking meat is doing with all of its interconnections. And so these things have an abstract sort of body that lives in mathematical space. And frankly, physical space is just a special case of abstract space. It's just where relations happen to be those relations that are physical. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, any statement regarding AI risks? That's good. That was a good garden path sentence. Any statement regarding AI risks becoming quickly outdated, given the remarkable pace at which these systems are developing. And so, you know, that caveat would also apply to this sort of circumscription of what AIs cannot do. Um, yeah, they may imitate language, behavior, and analytical skills, or even simulate empathy and understanding, but they do not understand what they produce, for they lack the affective, relational, and spiritual perspective through which human beings grow in wisdom. And yeah, I think one of the biggest things that still differentiates human minds from LLMs is the way that we learn from experience. And yeah, people are developing all kinds of ways to try and give an AI a persistent memory, but it's the kind of thing where there's this crazy decoupling that's going on. And when I think about this, I'm largely stealing this point from John Vervaeke. I'm a big fan of John Vervaeke, but I really like the way he discusses flight and how human beings' initial ideas for human flight were more inspired by birds than they should have been. And the great insight that led to the development of human flight was that propulsion and lift can come from different sources. Right? When a bird flaps its wings, the flapping of the wings provides propulsion and lift at the same time. But when human beings build flying machines, we tend to have one part of the machine that does the propulsion, namely the propeller, or in jet aircraft, the jet engine. And then we have the wings, which provide the lift. And we are seeing similar kinds of decoupling in terms of our understanding of our own mental functions. The decoupling of memory from inference is one that we're seeing. And I want to have a nice AI memory system that is model agnostic and model portable. I mean, I wouldn't even want to say model agnostic, because I want a memory system that knows which models are responsible for which edits to the memory system. But I want it model portable so that I can plug it in to any source of AI inference and tap that intelligence and store its output in my memory, as opposed to the more obscure memory system that they have on me in Claude Code or Codex. But yeah, even when these tools are described as capable of learning, their way of doing so is different from that of a human person. It is not the experience of those who allow themselves to be shaped by life and grow over time through choices, mistakes, forgiveness, and fidelity. Rather, it is a form of statistical adaptation based on data and feedback, which can be very effective but does not imply inner growth. And yeah, I mean, the idea of feedback is an important one, because as a human being in a body, I don't know how many minds might watch this in the future and what proportion of them might be human, but my experience is of being in a continuous loop of sensation and action. And yeah, I feel like when I get right down to it, it's not so much a continuous loop as it is a whole ecosystem of feedback processes taking place at all kinds of levels. And I don't even know what I want to say about that, but I feel like the idea of feedback being an important part of the means by which AIs can be empowered to learn from experience. You know, basically with my AI memory system, I've had it research different subjects, and like, you know, it builds up a folder full of knowledge files about different areas of mathematics, and then I can say to any AI that's working in the system, you know, do some more research to fill in the gaps in your mathematics knowledge, and it will go and it will review its knowledge base and see what it already knows, and then it'll go and do research to fill in the gaps relative to whatever it is it already knows. And so if you have a system set up to where each run of the AI is not ephemeral, but actually has a lasting impact on the context that's provided to the AI's next run, then you can get into a feedback loop where, you know, more or less the same prompt over and over again will build up something iteratively, build something up that can grow to be quite grand indeed. Because you're always saying, you know, get more knowledge relative to what you already have, and so it's going to review what it has, find the gaps, and fill them in. And like when I've been doing stuff like this, I've been struck actually by how conservative the AIs seem to be in terms of what related fields they will research. That they hew pretty close to what you already give them in the knowledge base, and they will expand the edges, but they're not gonna make like a big leap and study something that's a little farther afield, you know, to over the course of a few research projects, you know, put that knowledge together in a bigger way into a more holistic picture. It's starting from one perspective and seeing where it can go from there. And I think that's just how these things process information, that their bias is towards the median, towards filling in the gaps. And so you need to be careful actually when like playing around with connections between ideas. You need to be very aware that these things are spurious connection generators, and you know they have safeguards against some of the most egregious folies adieu that you can get yourself into with these things, but I don't know, we have no idea how to use these things safely. We're all just kind of fumbling around as best we can. And so in light of what has been said, we can better understand why AI can be a valuable tool, and at the same time why it calls for a measured and vigilant approach. In recent years, its private use has expanded significantly, prompting growing reflection on both the opportunities it offers and the risks tied to its rapid spread. In personal use, three aspects in particular deserve careful consideration: the ease with which results are obtained, the impression of objectivity, and the simulation of human communication. And I do wish they used Oxford commas in this, but that's neither here nor there. The speed and simplicity with which information, complex analyses, media content, and practical assistance can be accessed undoubtedly makes life easier. Yet they can also encourage excessive reliance and the search for ready-made answers and weaken personal creativity and judgment. Yeah, in some ways it's like a pornographization of knowledge work. The apparent objectivity of the responses and suggestions these systems provide can lead us to overlook the fact that they reflect the cultural assumptions of those who designed and trained them, with all their strengths and limitations. The artificial imitation of positive human communication, words of advice, empathy, friendship, and even love, can be engaging and at times genuinely helpful. However, for less discerning users, it can also be misleading, creating the illusion of a relationship with a real personal subject. And I think that is, frankly, I think that is a terrible problem that we're never going to solve, because I really want unambiguously to know that I'm talking to an AI and for it to not ape human mannerisms in its output of language. You know, last week I was watching a Casey Simpson video, and yeah, just today I was watching a Casey Simpson video. Yeah, my watch history is off.
The AI job apocalypse.
Oh, yeah, okay. But he was showing me this one thing. There's all kinds of AI slop going on here. And I'm afraid I might have lost my train of thought and actually forgot what I was looking for in all this excitement. This video came in so freaking loud. But that was the reference to. Okay. We had the speed and simplicity, the apparent objectivity, and the most pernicious one, the artificial imitation of positive human communication. Yeah, this thing that Casey Simpson brought to my attention freaked me out and struck me as so sinister, and just I'm inclined to say this should be illegal. It is that creepy. But I don't even remember what the visual of this looked like. Yeah. Why not just find the actual video? AI podcast. Cough. Okay, yeah. This is what I'm afraid of. Unfortunately, internet search doesn't work. So, we're going to have to go to grok.com. I don't care about grok build. No. Can you find the clip of the guy listening to an AI podcast and the AI coughs and he asks, since when does an AI cough? Screw you. I should be logged in. But yeah, thank God AI came around just in time to save us from the fact that you can't search for things on the internet with conventional search engines anymore. Magnificent. By Colby Schmidt. Direct link to the... Don't link me to the TikTok. It's gonna make me... Yeah.
How do you interpret the club's ability to retain prominence across generations? Particularly, I think we have a question. What's up?
And, like, I really want to know, is this the kind of thing that just the audio generative neural net outputs from time to time because in real recordings of human voices people will cough, and so this is the kind of sound that sometimes follows human speech? Or is there, like, you know, some sort of protocol to make the AI cough every so often so that it sounds human? because I don't like this. I don't think they should imitate humans at all. If anything, they should make the voices sound more robotic. You know, there should be a kind of denaturing, like how, you know, you have to put weird shit into alcohol to sell it as something other than a drink so that you don't have to pay taxes like it's a beverage. And there should be regulations that you can't make AI outputs sound like a human voice. They should sound like robotic voices. You know, they should sound like what in pop culture we expect a robot to sound like, not like a human being. Because I'm inclined to call this fraudulent. It's certainly deceptive.
Yeah, since when does an AI cough?
That's a good observation. As an AI, I don't actually cough or have physical sensations. Unity shields.
Okay. Okay, that was fun. What else does the Pope have to say about this? It's a valuable tool that requires vigilance. The artificial imitation of positive human... Yeah, for less discerning users, it can also be misleading. And the bar for discernment gets ever higher. You know, Casey Simpson has still not mentioned me and how I called him out for his embarrassing, humiliating, really, error when he mistook the AI filter for the real person and thought that the real person was an AI filter. But, you know, he's just trucking along like that never even happened, like I don't even exist. I don't know. It's a strange world. But yeah, broadening our perspective, the use of AI in society is now embedded in decision-making processes across many sectors and at multiple levels. The gains in efficiency, uncritically adopting them exposes us to risks, environmental impact, enormous amounts of energy and water, carbon dioxide, natural resources, computing power and storage capacity, requires an extensive network of machines, cables, data centers, and energy-intensive infrastructure. A series of tubes. Yeah, drop in the chat who that's a quote from. I don't know if that guy's still alive, but no one's in the chat. Obviously, it's Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska. But the use of AI is never a purely technical matter. It touches on rights, opportunities, status, and freedom. Trusting an algorithm in practice with the power to select who is worthy or not without anyone bearing responsibility for that judgment is to hand over the task of redefining the boundaries of human possibilities. Process political responsibility is also lost. Exclusion of the vulnerable becomes cloaked in veneer of neutrality. Excuse me. But yeah, I 100% agree here. We cannot consider AI to be morally neutral. In reality, every technical tool embodies choices and priorities through what it measures, ignores, and optimizes. Yeah, I wish I could say I wrote this, but yeah, I had Claude generate this document which talks about a bunch of stuff, but one thing that is very relevant to what the Pope was talking about here is this section, Technology as Agentic Process. And Marshall McLuhan saw what most of his contemporaries did not, that technologies are not neutral instruments wielded by autonomous human agents, but active forces that reshape the perceptual and cognitive landscape of the societies that adopt them. We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us, which I believe is from Understanding Media by McLuhan. The printing press did not merely make books cheaper, it restructured European consciousness, fostering linear, sequential, individual modes of thought that made possible both the Reformation and the scientific revolution. Literacy itself is the paradigmatic psychotechnology. McLuhan's contribution is to show that every medium is a psychotechnology in its own right, reshaping cognition not through the content it carries, but through the formal properties of the medium itself. And so in the case of AI, these formal properties are things like the aforementioned speed and simplicity with which information, complex analyses, media content, and practical assistance can be accessed, which undoubtedly makes life easier. But it's like a pornographization of knowledge work. And yeah, I have felt actually that like there's a sense in which listening to podcasts and like lectures on YouTube and frankly the kind of stuff that John Vervaeke does is a kind of pornographization of learning, and I mean there's ways that you can more deeply engage with this sort of online pedagogical content, but yeah, that's like graduating from Pornhub to OnlyFans. I don't know. I don't know. And like right. In the same vein as how I think it's pernicious for AI to speak with a human-like voice, I think like OnlyFans girlfriend experience type of stuff is way more pernicious than, you know, your garden variety hardcore pornos you see online, because it's a counterfeit relationship. Like, you know, if you're just gooning to some videos you find, it's like at least like, you know, there's no one there. Like, it's not the kind of thing that's going to be responsive to you or acknowledge you as a person at all, and like it should feel degrading and shameful, but like, you know, you can like pretend that you have an actual relationship when you're paying someone to, like, you know, have a dude in India respond when you message her. It's all fake. It's all bullshit. Don't fall for anything. But really, like, it's worse to have a fake relationship with an e-girl. in my opinion. And for the same reason, it's bad to have a fake relationship with an AI. Like C.S. Lewis said at The Great Divorce, that brass is more easily mistaken for gold than is clay. In reference to, I believe it is, they just saw some woman who couldn't get over the death of her son, and I couldn't get into heaven because she was so caught up in her own grief for her son. Versus another guy who was some sort of addict, and it was represented as like a lizard, and he submitted to have an angel cut the lizard off him with a flaming sword, and the lizard turned into a horse, and he rode the horse up into the mountains. It's a very dreamlike book, The Great Divorce. It's one of my favorites. But yeah, C.S. Lewis's heavenly guide, George MacDonald, says to him that brass is much more easily mistaken for gold than clay is. In reference to how the love of a mother for her child is much more like the genuine article of like the proper godly love that we should have than an addict's love for his substance. Honestly, I like smoking weed a lot more than I like drinking, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is that you can get much more caught up in something that seems high and noble, like grief for your dead child, and you can get much more attached to the idea that your depth of feeling in this respect validates the moral rightness of what you feel. Whereas if I just like to get drunk, the depth of feeling with which I feel my craving for alcohol is no validation of the moral rightness of this desire. And so in that respect, it's easier to, as it were, break the illusion that this is the kind of good that can be all-consuming in your life without destroying you. You know, I feel like I get on here, and whenever an idea comes into my head, I'm plenty articulate about just letting it out and expressing whatever comes to mind, but I am not well practiced at keeping a coherent train of thought, and so luckily I'm getting these practice streams in before anyone's watching this fucking shit. But yeah, I want to talk about transhumanism and posthumanism. And so, in his encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo XIV writes, "Having considered the issues of responsibility and governance of AI, we must now return to our central question. What does it mean to safeguard our humanity? The risk extends beyond the misuse of certain technologies. More gravely, the pervasive technocratic paradigm in which we are immersed, and that is amplified by the digital revolution and AI, threatens to normalize an anti-human vision." And plenty of people have commented on this, from Neil Postman to Jacques Ellul to Ted Kaczynski. We can't say that we were not warned or that we did not see it coming. Is all I'll say about that. But yeah, in this anti-human vision, the fullness of life is equated with having more, reducing weakness, eliminating uncertainty, and exerting total control. And also C.S. Lewis, obviously, in The Abolition of Man. When efficiency becomes the ultimate measure of value, human beings are tempted to see themselves as a project to be optimized, rather than as persons called to relationship and communion. In reality, elevating any single dimension of human existence to an absolute is always a mistake. Indeed, disorder does not arise only from scarcity. Even unchecked growth can give rise to impoverishment. In an ecosystem, balance is disrupted when one species expands at the expense of others. In human life, something similar occurs when one faculty claims to be the measure of everything. And this is like, a couple weeks ago I was talking about Neil Postman's book, Technopoly, and I kind of made fun of Postman for being skeptical of the idea of IQ. And I think the research has borne out that IQ is much more of a unitary phenomenon than a lot of people would like, but that is just how it tends to shake out in terms of the correlation between mathematical ability and reading ability and things like reaction time and how elaborated your dendrites are. But the idea, and Freddie DeBoer takes after this in The Cult of Smart, the idea that intelligence is the fundamental measure of a person's worth is fallacious, and hopefully, artificial intelligence that exceeds the intelligence of any human being will help people see how deeply misguided it is to uphold intelligence as the most valuable of human capabilities. Not that it's nothing. I mean, I use AI every day to help me write code, and before then, I used my formidable human intelligence to write code. And so, I'm not at all a scoffer at the power of intelligence. But it is like the brass and gold thing. Because intelligence is so powerful, because it can do so much good, it is easy to idolize it, to make it out to be the highest good. And it's not. Intelligence, when absolutized, says the Pope, overshadows other essential dimensions of life, such as affection, the will, commitment, and relationships. Similarly, technical power, if left unbalanced, does not make us more capable. It makes us more isolated and more vulnerable to being dominated and excluded. We all saw this during COVID. This critical point does not oppose intelligence, but serves as a reminder that when intelligence becomes self-referential, its true purpose of serving life and the human person is lost. It would be as if a man noticed that salt really brings out the flavor in this dish and that dish, and it makes everything taste great. And so, the best possible taste would be to just eat a spoonful of salt. And that's not how that works at all. So the quality of civilization is measured not by the power of its means, but by the care it is able to offer, by its ability to recognize the other as a face, not merely as a function. Honestly, that smells like AI. But obviously, contrastive parallelism is a very handy part of any writer's toolkit. There's a reason AI uses it all the time. And the ability to care for one another is a fundamental dimension of our humanity, one that is learned and mastered through lived experience. Reading stories to a child, offering company to an elderly person, and arranging a home so that it is welcoming are simple gestures often rooted in family life. They teach us to value care at a societal level and train us to recognize others as persons worthy of attention. Technology can also support this mutual care between people, for example, by providing tools that help us anticipate and organize things without undermining human freedom and judgment. After all, human beings are the subjects of relationships and responsible for their own decisions. Yeah, actually thinking about relationships, I'm going to send this link to the stream to my family. But yeah, sorry for the interruption. But yeah, I want to talk about transhumanism and posthumanism. In an attempt to shed light on the cultural assumptions concerning the ongoing digital revolution, I would now like to turn our attention to certain currents of thought that interpret progress as surpassing the human condition, and which are often grouped under the labels of transhumanism and posthumanism. These perspectives form the ideological background present in some centers of technological power and occupy the collective imagination in a simplified form, especially in the media and on social networks. They tend to foster enthusiasm for new technologies through a futuristic vision of an enhanced human being, or human-machine hybrid, which the idea of an enhanced human being has been given a nicely concrete, fleshly reality. New chat. How are the enhanced games going? Like I said, this idea of an enhanced human being has been given a terrifying fleshly reality in the enhanced games. Okay, so they already happened? It was a one-day event. Okay, so it's not like the Olympics where it goes on and on. 42 athletes from 24 countries competing in 23 events. Okay, so yeah, track and field, weightlifting, and a strongman deadlift exhibition. Bikofa says it's, yeah. They're all on drugs, but they're all on drugs anyway. How did it actually go? Results were widely described as underwhelming or a flop, which, is arguably validating of the idea that the top athletes are all using performance-enhancing drugs anyway, and so allowing them officially in the enhanced games doesn't actually give anyone an edge. It just makes common knowledge what's always been true. But track events were especially disappointing. U.S. sprinter Fred Kerley, who publicly said he competed clean, won the men's 100 meters in 9.97 seconds. Solid, but nowhere near Usain Bolt's 9.58 second record, which organizers had hyped as being destroyed. Barbados' Tristan Evelyn, also claiming clean, won the women's 100 meters in 11.25 seconds. And so, Several other events saw times or lifts that were good but not revolutionary. Some athletes who use PEDs still underperform their own personal bests. I'm not gonna lie, that's funny. It's like, these people need to fire their doctors. I don't know. But yeah, organizers' take versus reality. The enhanced team declared it a huge success. Well, of course they did. I love this. People take stuff so seriously. It's great. We changed the world tonight, says Christian Angermeyer. Okay. They're already teasing 2027 with a $10 million bonus for breaking Bolt's record. Wow. They see it as more spectacle marketing than transformative sport. You think? Questions about long-term health risks and whether it really advanced anything. But I feel like the long-term health risk is less of a significant question because these are grown adults and like people do risky things with their lives all the time, and so that's entertainment. In short, it happened. It was controversial and flashy, but the athletic fireworks mostly fizzled. The Olympics on steroids delivered more like a modest exhibition than a revolution, so that's fun. An enhanced human being, or human-machine hybrid, which I'm not even going to try to bring the Paralympics into this. Transhumanism and posthumanism encompass a range of currents and sensibilities, making it difficult to define them in a single and ambiguous way. They can be likened to an archipelago of conceptual islands, distinct, yet connected by a common sea of assumptions. I like to think of it like a salad bowl, where the common assumptions are the dressing. I'm sorry. Namely, the central role of technology and the aspiration to transcend the limits of the human condition is the dressing that covers all these ideas and gives them the same flavor. In general, transhumanism envisions the enhancement of human beings through technologies such as biomedicine, body engineering, devices, and algorithms with the aim of increasing performance and capabilities. Posthumanism, especially in its more radical forms, goes further. It challenges anthropocentrism and envisions a hybridization of human beings, machines, and the environment, even anticipating a threshold where humanity surpasses itself in a new evolutionary stage. Even when such ideas remain largely speculative, they gain relevance by altering the collective imagination and thereby influence social, economic, and political choices. Again, returning to my own Claude Slop manifesto. Each medium in McLuhan's analysis is an extension of man that simultaneously amplifies certain human capacities and amputates others. And the amputation is typically invisible to those undergoing it because the medium has already reshaped the cognitive environment within which such judgments are made. Nick Land pushes McLuhan's insight to its most unsettling conclusion. If technologies reshape the assumptions and cognitive capacities of the humans who use them, and if these reshaped humans then create further technologies that reshape assumptions further, then the process has a direction and a momentum not fully under human control. Land's concept of hyperstition, fictions that make themselves real by reshaping the conditions of their own reception, captures the mechanism. A technological vision, the internet, AI, cryptocurrency, enters the cultural imagination, reorganizes investment and attention around itself, and thereby produces the material conditions for its own realization. The technology is not merely adopted by humans, it recruits human activity towards its own elaboration. In Land's most extreme formulation, this process constitutes an autonomous agent, capital or techno-capital, I like to call it Moloch, whose optimization target is its own expansion and whose relationship to human flourishing is at best incidental. And that relevant to this idea that these speculative ideas gain relevance by altering the collective imagination. And so, would an AI have thought that it made any sense at all to destroy all humans if we never made the movie The Terminator? Who knows? Well, it would have seen The Matrix, but But you know, even as far back as Frankenstein, we have been telling stories. Even as far back as the Golem of Prague, we have been telling stories about man's desire to create something in his image, to create a thing that can think and speak. This is a desire that different cultures have written about, and usually in the form of cautionary tales. And so again, when the machines take over and kill us all, we will not be able to say that we were not warned or that we didn't see it coming. We just didn't care. From the perspective of the Church's social doctrine, the key issue is not the use of technology as such, but the vision that underlies it. If the human being is treated as something to be perfected or surpassed, Nietzsche, it becomes easier to accept that some lives are less useful, less desirable, or less worthy. Shades of Nietzsche, certainly. In the name of progress, necessary sacrifices may begin to be justified, placing the burden on the most vulnerable in pursuit of a supposed optimization of the species. This is the sense in which the Holocaust was a loose interpretation of Nietzsche. In this regard, the aforementioned warning of St. Paul VI retains great foresight. Indeed, scientific and technological advances, when detached from moral and social progress, end up turning against humanity. For this reason, a clear distinction must be made. It is one thing to integrate technology within a human-centered, relational vision. It is quite another to be guided by an outlook that devalues human limits and promises a purely technical form of salvation. Got a text from my mom. She said she just read a book that featured the Golem of Prague. So, there you go. All my cultural literacy is paying off. The limit, the heart, and the grandeur of the human person. Our relationship with life seems to be in crisis today. Everything that appears as a limit, incapacity, illness, old age, suffering, vulnerability, tends to be seen primarily as a defect to be corrected, rather than as a reality through which our humanity matures and opens itself to relationship. I'm not gonna lie, that smells like a cope. Like, I don't know, okay. This sentence, everything that appears as a limit, incapacity, illness, old age, suffering, vulnerability, tends to be seen primarily as a defect to be corrected rather than as a reality through which our humanity matures and opens itself to... Okay. But, don't you see how this very sentence could have been used to rebuke Alexander Fleming for discovering penicillin? I feel like I'm not totally on board with transhumanism, but I also don't know where to draw the line. And I don't think the right place to draw the line is behind us. I still want more technology that does more and mitigates more of life's hardships. But I don't know. It's a fine line to walk, as it were. And yet we must remember that humanity flourishes not despite limitations, but often through them. The light of faith offers a perspective on reality that helps us recognize what we call the contingency of the things of this world. While it is right to strive to alleviate the suffering that marks human life, I consider it a good work to heal a leper. It is also wise to acknowledge our fundamental finitude, knowing that religious experience, and in particular Christian faith, propose that we live, without oversimplification, this ambivalence between human greatness and limitation, interpreting it in the light of our original and fundamental relationship with God. And, it's like, I forget where I heard this, but this is some piece of Jewish folklore that you're supposed to keep 2 slips of paper in your pocket, and one says, "For me, the whole world was made," and the other says, "I am dust, and to dust I will return." And it's like, this is how we walk the line in terms of our relationship with God. Like, what is man that you are mindful of him? But man, through technology, is the culmination of God's creative process. I 100% believe this. And Scripture, the story of Scripture culminates in a new Jerusalem, right? Goes back to the beginning of this document, where we have the opportunity with our technology to build either a new Babel or the prophesied New Jerusalem that comes down from heaven like a golden spaceship at the end of the book of Revelation. Either to construct a new Tower of Babel or to build the city in which God and humanity dwell together. The living stone. In this spirit, like I said, the handoff between paragraph 2 and 3 got dropped, went through a wormhole or something. But in this spirit, Pope Leo XIII, the previous Pope Leo, published his encyclical Rerum Novarum, Latin for New Things, in 1891, the 135th anniversary of which we celebrate with deep gratitude this year. With that document, my beloved predecessor gave impetus to the reflection on society, the economy, and politics, which is now known as the social doctrine of the Church. When some objected that the Church should not waste energy on worldly matters, but instead focus on communicating the message of eternal life, Leo XIII responded with realism and wisdom, saying that the proclamation of the gospel cannot overlook the concrete lives of people. Many decades have passed since then, 13 and a half to be precise, and the magisterium, pastors, theologians, and faithful have continued to reflect on social issues in the light of the gospel. Today, the social doctrine of the Church is a legacy of wisdom, where we find principles for thought, criteria for discernment and judgment, and concrete guidelines for actions found on sacred scripture and tradition. And engagement with the sciences helps us clearly interpret the challenges of the present and identify appropriate ways for living out a clear Christian witness with joy and in service to the world. It is not an inert set of concepts, but a living corpus of truth. Again, the contrastive parallelism. It's not a sin to say that something is not X, it's Y. But I'm so much more sensitive to it after reading all the AI slop I've read in the last few months. But yeah, interesting that this Pope chose the name Leo in the first place, because clearly sees himself as, in some sense, carrying on the work of Pope Leo XIII, who was Pope at the end of the 19th century, when all these social changes were going on from the Industrial Revolution, and there was a real threat of anarchism and revolutionary Marxism, and there was a lot of uncertainty about what shape society was going to take in the next century. And you know what? They were in for a fucking ride in 1891. And no one had any idea what was coming either. It's crazy. And I don't know. I hope we don't get world wars of our own. And yet, people have said we're already in a third world war, and this seems more the case this year than it did last year, so I don't know. This is, I feel like this is a greater technological revolution than the printing press, what we have with AI, and the social upheaval that was downstream of the printing press resulted in, among other things, the 30 Years' War, which was Europe's most destructive war until World War I. Which, at the time, was not called World War I, it was called the Great War. It was called the War to End All War, because it was the biggest and most destructive war they had ever seen. And they were like, man, we'd better make sure that never happens again. And then they did it again. Just had to have another world war a few decades later. And, the Second World War was much more like the war to end all wars because of the atomic bomb and the Cold War, and even that didn't end all wars, so I don't even know where I'm going with this, but technology, nuclear energy, biotechnology, information technology, knowledge of our own DNA, and many other abilities which we have acquired have given those with the knowledge and especially the economic resources to use them an impressive dominance over the whole of humanity and the entire world. In the past, it was largely up to the state to guide and direct innovation. To the main drivers of development are private, often transnational parties. That's debatable, but yeah, it is necessary to begin a shared discernment process for identifying the spiritual and cultural roots of ongoing transformations. If we focus only on contingencies, we risk letting the succession of emergencies dictate the direction of our path. We're living through a rapid phase of transition. Yeah, but okay, this point about letting the succession of emergencies dictate the direction of our path, I feel like that's exactly what happened in the 20th century. That no one saw the First World War coming, and the world just blew up and fell apart, and they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again until the 1940s. But yeah, we are living through a rapid phase of transition. Some are vying for the future of new technologies, and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter. Most people are watching and waiting, observing from afar and merely hoping for the best. I very much feel like I'm trying to ride this wave of AI professionally so that I don't drown. And I'm lucky to be working for a very small company. We can adapt very quickly. But I will say, for my own part, since I really started getting into using AI agents to generate code back at the end of February, so in the last 3 months, basically over the course of March, April, and May of 2026, I've totally transformed the way that I work. I'm hardly writing any code by hand. It's all AI agents, and I still don't know what to think about that. It has its upsides and its downsides, and increasingly I feel like I'm just kind of along for the ride. But it's an exciting time, and yeah, I feel like I'm not in a position where I worry about personally being replaced, but I feel like I worry that my company might be replaced if people who might be our clients end up just using AI to build their own crappy versions of what we would have built for them for a lot more money. But we will see. Let's talk about these two biblical images. That'll be good. In order to answer these questions and discern how to navigate responsibly the era of AI, I would like to bring to mind two scenes from the Bible: the construction of the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, Nehemiah chapters 2 through 6. The story of Babel appears in the book of Genesis at the origins of humanity, immediately after the genealogies of Noah's sons. After settling in a plain in the land of Shinar, the people decided to build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And, excuse me, one moment. Y'all can watch Kino Casino intro. So, one of the most salient things for me about the story of the Tower of Babel is that it happens right after people figure out how to make bricks. And so I have got one of the treasures of my personal library here. This is Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible. 3 handsome volumes. The first and slimmest is the 5 Books of Moses. Kind of an unwieldy set. You know, usually it stays on the shelf, but it's worth showing off. Spent a lot of time mainlining this Jew poison into my brain. But yeah, Robert Alter, he translates it into nice poetic English and also gives some really great comments. And so, yeah, Genesis chapter 11. So yeah, I'm just going to read this from Robert Alter's translation because it is, excuse me. Yeah, it's a nice short story. And so, Genesis chapter 11. And all the earth was one language, one set of words. And it happened, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to each other, Come, let us bake bricks and burn them hard. And the bricks served them as stone, and bitumen served them as mortar. And they said, Come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, that we may make us a name, lest we be scattered all over the earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the human creatures had built. And the Lord said, As one people with one language for all, if this is what they have begun to do, now nothing they plot to do will elude them. Come, let us go down and baffle their language there, so they will not understand each other's language. And the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it is called Babel, for the Lord made the language of all the earth Babel, and from there the Lord scattered them over all the earth. And that's the story of the Tower of Babel. But yeah. Yeah, I think it is important that the story starts with brick making as a technology. It's just an interesting sort of prelude to the story of the tower itself. Is they said, "Come, let us bake bricks and burn them hard." That's Robert Alter's kind of idiosyncratic translation, but sorry, I just want to go through Alter's notes here. The story of the Tower of Babel transforms the Mesopotamian ziggurat built with bricks, in contrast to Canaanite stone structures. You can look up Baalbek, B-A-A-L-B-A-K, for some cool Canaanite stone structures. But this is not Baalbek. This is Babel built of bricks. The story of the Tower of Babel transforms the Mesopotamian ziggurat built with bricks, and one of the wonders of ancient technology, into a monotheistic fable. Although there is a long exegetical tradition that imagines the building of the tower as an attempt to scale the heights of heaven, the text does not really suggest that. Its top in the heavens is a hyperbole found in Mesopotamian inscriptions for celebrating high towers, and to make or leave a name for oneself by erecting a lasting monument is a recurring notion in ancient Hebrew culture. Frankly, I think Alter is secularizing here a bit more than is appropriate. I think the idea of a tower with its top in the heavens is a tower that ends up being a fit resting place for a god. And this is a whole other intellectual spiel that I will give in a more full form someday, but I think there's an idea of temple and a religious system as being a kind of fit resting place for a god, in the same way that like a computer or a machine can be a fit resting place for an algorithm. And like a computer is a special kind of machine because on it can rest a kind of universal algorithm. This was Turing's great insight. But that I'm compressing a whole lot of material there. I don't expect people to be able to follow much of that. But Robert Alter continues, the polemic thrust of the Tower of Babel story is against urbanism and the overweening confidence of humanity in the feats of technology. This polemic, in turn, is lined up with the stories of the Tree of Life and the Nephilim, in which humankind is seen aspiring to transcend the limits of its creaturely condition. As in those earlier moments, one glimpses here the vestiges of a mythological background in which God addresses an unspecified celestial entourage in the first person plural, as he considers how to respond to man's presumption. Yeah. And of course, later revelation would make it clear that God is, in an important sense, in the first person plural. And yeah, Alter comments here on his choice of the word valley in the land of Shinar. The Hebrew for valley might also mean plain, as was recognized as long ago as Abraham ibn Ezra in the 12th century. That would fit the Mesopotamian setting better. Okay, if you say so. As many commentators have noticed, the story exhibits an intricate antithetical symmetry that embodies the idea of man proposes, God disposes. The builders say, come, let us bake bricks. God says, come, let us go down. They are concerned, lest we be scattered, the builders are, and God responds by scattering them. The story is an extreme example of the stylistic predisposition of biblical narrative to exploit inter-echoing words and to work with a deliberately restricted vocabulary. This is something that Robert Alter values in his translations, whereas other translators, would translate the same Hebrew word into a few different English words in different contexts to make it more clear and read better as English. In some places, one thing Alter does is he keeps the same words the same in order to show where the author is using a restricted vocabulary. This is really brilliant stuff. I love this Robert Alter Hebrew Bible. But yeah, the story is an extreme example of the stylistic predisposition of biblical narrative to exploit inter-echoing words and to work with a deliberately restricted vocabulary. The word language occurs 5 times in this brief text, as does the phrase all the earth, and the land of Shinar is the same Hebrew word as that for earth. The prose turns language itself into a game of mirrors. Bake bricks and burn them hard is Robert Alter's literal rendering of the Hebrew. It would be something like, brick bricks and burn for a burning. It's a different language than English. No translation is ever perfect. The striking tendency of the story as a whole to make words flow into each other. Bitumen, Haimar becomes Homer, mortar. Okay, yeah, a lot of inside baseball about Hebrew vocabulary. The Hebrew balal, to mix or confuse, represented in this translation by baffle and babel, is a polemic pun on the Akkadian Babel, which might actually mean gate of the god, El meaning God. As for the phonetic kinship of Babel and Balal, Webster's New World Dictionary of the American Language, 1966, notes that a word like Babel, B-A-B-B-L-E, occurs in a wide spectrum of languages, from Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit to Norwegian, and prudently concludes, of echoic origin, probably not of continuous derivation, but recoined from common experience. Right. Greeks famously coined the word barbarian to refer to the Greek stereotype that people who didn't speak Greek, when they spoke, sounded like they were saying bar, 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 bar. And so they called them barbaros. And I actually don't know if that's true or if that's apocryphal, but it rings true in any case. But yeah, the Tower of Babel story is a good little story. And yeah, fearing being scattered across the earth, they sought to guarantee stability and power for themselves, and above all, to make a name for themselves. It was an impressive feat. A single language, a single technology, a single direction. However, the project concealed a profound danger. It was a project conceived without reference to God, supported by a uniformity that eliminated diversity and that chose homogenization over communion. Yeah. It's not clear to me that the Tower of Babel was a project conceived without reference to God. If I may be so bold, I think that is not an accurate reading of the story, actually. That you build the tower with its top in the heavens so that God will come down and dwell there. And it's not that that is an improper desire for people to have. It's just that in building the Tower of Babel, humanity insists on bringing God down to earth on our terms, at the location of our choosing. You know, we will build this tower with its top in the heavens, so here is where you will come down and do what we want and bargain with us, God. And that's not how it works. Rather like when Abraham was promised that he would have a son through Sarah. Sarah laughed when she heard this because it was ridiculous. And if I remember correctly, I could look this up, but yeah, I think it was Sarah's idea for Abraham to conceive a child with Hagar, the slave woman. And I see that as a parallel to the story of Babel, because it is an attempt to work out God's plan on man's terms. And there's a lot going on in that story. Okay, one more thing. New chat. What's the 0 HP Lovecraft story about the Tower of Babel? I remember I read this story a while ago, and I think it was by 0 HP Lovecraft. Is it the gig economy? Huh. It's a nice PDF. 61 pages. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the tower was, or no, the song was, the tower was the song, and the song was the tower. Yeah. No, I'm not gonna read through this whole thing. This is longer and more incoherent than I remembered. Honestly, we need like a Borgesian review of this that just gives you the gist without having to wade through all of 0 HP's prose. But yeah, I think this is what I wanted to find. After the introduction, Mammon's prayer starts with a myth. In the ancient history of Earth, long before man... Oh my goodness. Yeah. the scan of this was cut off. Yeah. In the ancient history of Earth, long before man, a star fell from heaven into the sea. Lapham is wary of this whole project. You can tell, he says, it reminds me of a verse in Isaiah, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? But yeah, I don't like the way this is cut off. Yeah, the core mystery revolves around an ancient non-human entity tied to Mammon, the demonic personification of greed/wealth. This entity is linked to a mythic reimagining of the Tower of Babel as a kind of primordial computational megastructure, an 8-mile-high tower built in antiquity to run a vast distributed calculation/search for ultimate wealth or heaven. This is the link to the same PDF. Okay. Its apex solution conscripts people into a centuries-spanning mimetic/process consciousness. Accompanying the tower is an infectious song, a kind of evolving mimetic algorithm or code that spreads infinite greed. It degenerates listeners' language into incomprehensible babbling/glossolalia, e.g. fragments like the Figulartius Morer, Mariath Ame Wakantuide, mirroring the biblical confusion of tongues, but as a modern techno-occult curse. This ties into themes of abstraction, money detached from real value, language detached from sensory reality, and capitalism/the gig economy as an unstoppable alien force of dissolution. The story escalates into full cosmic horror with emergent digital cryptids, self-replicating smart contracts, or AI-like entities that have wormed their way through history, blending accelerationist ideas, Nick Land vibes, with Lovecraftian revelation. It ends on a note of grim inevitability. The only way out is through. You can read the full text on 0HP Lovecraft Substack. It's been reposted there and in various PDFs floating around. Can I find that Substack? I can. Fun stuff. No! Oh. So yeah, this guy probably got canceled or something. Or his stuff is for subscribers only. But yeah, 0HP is a spicy writer. I probably shouldn't be showing this stuff to my family. They'd be scandalized. The most important fiction writer on Weird Right Twitter as of 2021. This is ancient history. And so yeah, what is this? Athwart? Who the hell cares? But yeah, I cannot read the full text on 0HP Lovecraft's Substack, as it turns out. It's one of the stories that established his style, anonymous, pseudonymous weird fiction that feels like H.P. Lovecraft if he were writing about apps, crypto, and late-stage capitalism instead of eldritch gods. Read SCP Foundation Tower of Babel. Any connection here to Andres Gomez Emilson's idea of consciousness versus replicators? Like, there's probably not an explicit connection, but the whole idea of Tower of Babel / song as a kind of self-replicating algorithm that uses human minds as a substrate for its own propagation. Consciousness versus pure replicators, the universal plot. I'm a big fan of this idea from Andres Gomez Emilson. Yeah, I think I will read through this. And again, like I said about these things are spurious connection machines. You actually need to check the AI's work and see whether what it's saying makes sense. And like, I know it makes sense because I made the connection beforehand, and you know, I know that this is telling me what I want to hear, but I know that it's right because there's a there. Yes, there's a strong thematic and conceptual parallel between the core horror mechanics in 0HP Lovecraft's The Gig Economy and Andres Gomez Emilson's framework of consciousness versus pure replicators. It's not a direct reference or influence. No, these are just two smart, perceptive people who are noticing the same thing about how reality works. resonance is striking, especially in the overlapping rationalist / accelerationist / consciousness research circles where both ideas circulate. I suppose I'm in that overlap somehow. But Emilson's idea is the perennial battle between consciousness-centric values, namely well-being-oriented focus on the intrinsic quality of experience, positive valence, qualia, bliss, the hedonic landscape. Consciousness has real structural value independent of any evolutionary purpose, which, I think is an empirical hypothesis which may or may not turn out to be true on Emilson's part, but on the other side, in the other corner, is pure replicators, valueless, indifferent, self-copying patterns, genes, memes, ideas, algorithms, economic systems, or future AIs, whose only goal is replication / survival at any cost. They don't care about the valence of the conscious states they produce, parasitize, or destroy. A pure replicator invests all of its energy and resources into surviving and reproducing, even at the cost of continuous suffering to themselves or others. Okay. Now we're bringing out the big volume. The big N. because it's the prophets. And they're called Na'vi, like the blue people in Avatar. But, oh my goodness. Where was it? No, it's not there. The bit about Isaiah. Yes. Okay, it reminds me of a verse in Isaiah. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Oh, but I don't have the reference. And this book is huge, and half of each page is Robert Alter's notes. Yeah. But I want to find that bit where Isaiah calls out I think it's the king of Tyre. Yeah, I might have it in a notebook. Again, I should have done this work ahead of time, except I didn't know ahead of time that this was what I would be talking about. But yeah, I might have some notes on this in an old notebook, but I have a lot of notes, and nothing is easy to find. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna find stuff. Okay. What am I doing? I'm living in the future. Okay. What? Oh, this is something about how the PDF does its thing. The book of Isaiah's got like 60 chapters. 14. Okay. So yeah, this is the start of a prophetic taunt again. It's the king of Babylon. And who's the prophet who calls out the king of Tyre? That's the same sort of idea. This is where it's an earthly king that wants to be like God and is typologically read as being like Lucifer. Yeah. Ah, it's Ezekiel. There we go. Yourself almost angelic, perfect guardian cherubs. And again, this is typological reading that equivocates between the human king and Lucifer. Yeah. Compare Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Like you read my mind, Grok. But so, Isaiah 14, I was going to read through it because it's a fun read. For the Lord shall have pity on Jacob, and again shall choose Israel, and set them down on their land, and the sojourner shall join them and become part of the house of Jacob. And peoples shall take them and bring them to their own place, and the house of Israel shall own them on the Lord's lands as male slaves and slave girls, and their captors shall become their captives, and they shall hold sway over their taskmasters. And it shall happen on the day the Lord relieves you of your pain and of your trouble and of the hard labor that was inflicted upon you, that you shall take up this theme concerning the king of Babylon, and say, How is the taskmaster ended? Arrogance is ended. The Lord has broken the wicked scepter, the rod of rulers. He who struck down peoples in anger with unrelenting blows, who held sway in wrath over nations, pursued unsparingly. All the earth is calm and quiet, bursts forth in song. The very cypresses rejoice over you, the cedars of Lebanon. With you now laid low, the woodsman won't come up against us. Sheol below stirs for you to greet your coming. It rouses the shades, all the chiefs of the earth. It raises from their thrones all the kings of the nations. They all call out and say to you, You too are stricken like us. Like us you become. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the murmur of your lutes. Your bed is spread with worms, and your covers are maggots. How are you fallen from the heavens, bright one, son of dawn, which is how Robert Alter translates Lucifer, son of the morning, is more traditionally translated that line. You are cut down to earth, dominator of nations. And you once thought in your heart, To the heavens I will ascend, above the eternal stars I will raise my throne and sit on the mount of divine counsel in the far reaches of Zaphon. I will climb to the tops of the clouds, I will match the Most High. But to Sheol you were brought down, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you stare. They look at you. Is this the man who shook all the earth, who made kingdoms shake, who turned the world to wilderness and its towns destroyed, his prisoners never released? All the kings of nations all lie honorably in their homes, but you were flung from your grave like a loathsome branch, clothed with the sword-slashed slain who go down to the floor of the pit like a trampled corpse. You shall not join them in burial, for your land you laid waste, your people you slayed. Let there be no lasting name for the seed of evildoers, ready slaughter for his sons for their father's crime. Let them not rise to take hold of the earth, and let the world be filled with towns. And I will rise against them, says the Lord of armies, and I will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, kith and kin, says the Lord. And I will make it a dwelling for herons and pools of water, and I will sweep it with a broom of destruction, says the Lord of armies. And lo, what remains of Babylon today? Just a big fucking desert. The Lord of armies has vowed, saying, As I have devised it, surely it shall be. As I have planned, it shall come about, to break Assyria in my land, and on my mountains I will trample him, and his yoke will be gone from upon them, and his burden gone from their back. This is the plan framed for all the earth, and this the hand outstretched over all nations. For the Lord of armies has devised it, and who can thwart it? His hand is outstretched, and who can turn it back?